Recognizing Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move that Bill M206, the Residential Tenancy Amendment Act 2019, be now read a second time. I'm very proud to stand today in the second reading of the private member's bill I introduced on March the 7th, and I would like to take this time to thank government for calling this bill for second reading and for their feedback on it over the last 2 months. I'd also like to recognize and thank the BC Liberals for making this the first round of family violence changes that were brought forward in the Residential Tenancy Act amendments in 2015. Their work set the foundation for this bill. This bill before us today was developed in close consultation and collaboration with West Coast Leaf and the Ending Violence Association of British Columbia. I'm very grateful to both of them for their advocacy and their leadership on this file. My office also spoke extensively with Landlord BC, and they were very supportive of the changes, just as they were in 2015 when the family violence provisions were first brought in. I commend them for standing against violence. And lastly, thank you to the legislative drafters and editors who worked through half a dozen versions of this bill to make sure every word was just right and legally sound. As canvassed in its first reading, this bill amends the Residential Tenancy Act to provide tenants with the ability to end their fixed-term lease if staying in their rental unit is a threat to their safety or security. It expands on the constrained family violence provisions introduced in 2015 and gives, for example, someone who is sexually assaulted by their roommate or neighbour the right to break their lease so they can move to a safer home. The term occupant violence was first introduced and defined in the bill presented at first reading to capture all violence associated with the property using an adapted version of the existing family violence definition. After receiving extensive feedback from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing that the distinction between who is an occupant, who is a tenant, and the overlap between the two may be somewhat unclear to some people, so I've tabled, and you'll notice on the order papers, an amendment, a number of amendments to try to clarify this, and we'll move them at committee stage. In particular, you'll notice on the order papers the amendment to Section 1. We've changed occupant violence to household violence, and that was based on extensive feedback from legislative drafters as well. The amendments adjust some of the language for clarity and certainty, but the original policy intent remains. For example, I propose that we replace the term occupant violence with household violence, as I mentioned, to prevent any confusion that arises from using the term occupant and tenant in overlapping sections, and that was advised to us by government's suggestions. But the policy outcome, as I mentioned, is the same. This Amendment Act gives tenants the right to break their fixed-term leases if staying in the rental unit is a threat to their safety or security. Another amendment you'll see on the order papers will be made to the commencement section to give the Minister ample time for consultation with the third-party verifiers before it comes into force, a change I was happy to make as they are key to the success of this section of the Residential Tenancy Act. As it currently stands, Honourable Speaker, for the family violence section, written third-party verification of violence can be provided by police, listed medical practitioners, counsellors, First Nation support workers, victim support workers, and others. So the definition of, with respect to who can provide information in the family violence section is carried forward into this tenants or occupant or household section of the bill. The previous Liberal government did an admirable job with the development of the regulation that they put in place with the 2015 legislation, and having regulations that extend the verification powers beyond law enforcement is vital, as not all survivors will be going to the police as their first step. Some will choose to focus on working with medical practitioners, First Nation support, counsellors, etc. In the case of domestic violence, for example, the risk of injury or death can actually increase if a violent partner learns their spouse has contacted police or is planning or leaving. And having a range, Honourable Speaker, of professionals able to vouch for victims will show them will allow them rather to choose the safest option that they believe is in their best interests. This bill also makes it clear that the regulations listing which professionals and practitioners are authorized to provide confirmation, or the confirmation statement rather, about family violence will have the same powers in cases involving household violence. Although simple in its structure, the bill will have a significant impact on the people who need it. The Ending Violence Association of British Columbia estimates that there are approximately 60,000 incidents of sexual and domestic violence in British Columbia each year, over 1,000 cases a week. And in the majority of cases, that violence happens in the home. Once that happens, the home may no longer be a safe place for the victim or their children, and the implications of that shift from a home to the scene of a crime are profound. I'm proud to be advancing this bill that will give survivors the freedom to seek safety, security, and the space needed to heal. No one should be forced to live in close proximity to their perpetrator. This bill supports survivors. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.